All right, everybody, let's pull that tarp. My guest today is child development specialist Claire Lerner. Claire has over 30 years of experience. She's trained as a clinical social worker and psychotherapist, and she's the author of the book, Why Is My Child in Charge? And my story connects with Claire's. A few months ago, my wife told me, you have to go listen to this podcast called Raising Good Humans with Dr. Eliza Pressman that Claire was a guest on. And as a parent to young kids, I was particularly interested in what Claire had to share. Claire, I loved your conversation with Dr. Pressman, and I'm so excited to be talking with you today.
Well, thanks for having me. I look forward to a spirited discussion.
Claire, as we have talked about, every week on this show, I talk to Olympians, professional athletes, CEOs, best-selling authors, musicians, successful people from all walks of life, top performers from every industry. And, not only am I a parent myself, but I'm also someone who studies many of the world's top performers. And principles like teamwork and collaboration and work ethic and leadership, things like that we talk about every week on this show. So I got to thinking, when I listened to your conversation with Dr. Pressman on Raising Good Humans, are there things that we can do with our children to set them up for maximum success and happiness later in life? It's interesting to me, both as a parent of young kids, but also as somebody, like I said, who is studying the world's top performers. So that's where I want to begin. I mean, I ask guests on this show all the time, is something like leadership or work ethic something that you're born with or something that you can develop? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I definitely think it's something you can nurture in your kids, and that there is a lot you can do to set that up and provide your children the tools and the skills and the confidence and the know-how to be a leader and be their best selves, for sure. Having said that, what the child brings to the table, right? Their temperament, their wiring, all the stuff they're born with that are innate also matter a lot, right? Because we know that children and human beings are not a monolithic group, right? So our reactions to the world around us, how we process things, how we react to things, is going to be very different based on how we're wired and how our systems and our psyches interpret and react to those experiences. So it's not like it's a cookie cutter approach where if you do X, Y, or Z, this is going to help your child, be a confident leader. It's a combination of providing them a range of experiences, parenting in a way that helps children understand the clear limits and boundaries in which you need to function, right, to be effective in this world, but balancing that with the individual you're dealing with, right? Because some kids are bigger reactors than other. Some kids come into this world a little more chill, a little more regulated, a little more prepared to be adaptable, where other kids who are wired to sort of be more intense and have bigger reactions to the world around them, those are kids who may need a little bit of a different approach in order to help them, right, learn to manage life's ups and downs in that effective way that makes them a good collaborator and a leader.
So let's stay on the word adaptable. You mentioned that there. I mean, we're in a time when we all have to be adapting. I mean, it's changed the way we work. The pandemic has changed the way we go to school. How can we, I guess, first by looking at children saying, okay, how do we assess how adaptable they are? And then how do we begin to help them be more adaptable with the ever-changing circumstances in our world?
Right. So actually, this could be a day-long symposium, right, on sort of how children operate and how their wiring and their temperament and the context in which they're born into affects their adaptability, right? So again, it's not like children are all born and going to respond exactly the same way. So the important thing I would say to parents starting from a very, very young age is you want to tune into their temperament. You want to tune into what makes my child tick. How does she respond to new experiences? Is she a kid who jumps right in, or is she a kid who needs a lot of time in order to feel safe in a new situation, right? Like that's adaptability, right? Like all of a sudden you're going to a new preschool. You've got a group of kids who runs in, doesn't look back, so excited, starts to build with magnet tiles, and they're good to go. And then you've got another group of kids who are clinging to their parents or their caregivers for dear life, right? So you've got the exact same scenario in front of you, very, very different reactions. And part of that is temperament, right? Those kids who tend to be more fearful and cautious are often the kids who we think of as more highly sensitive. They react more intensely to their experiences in the world. So they're like often either ecstatic or enraged, right? They like have no middle register. And everything is a big deal. So going to a new school might mean, oh, who are these people? And are they going to be nice to me? And what is this teacher going to say and do? And is my mommy going to come back? Like they tend to be intense and processors. And therefore, their adaptation experience may take a little longer, right? They have to overcome more of their sort of natural sort of anxieties because they are processing everything, as opposed to the kids who are like, great, substitute teacher, she seems fun, no problem, where other kids are, having a very hard time managing that kind of shift in their environment. We saw that a lot with COVID, right? Like every kid didn't react the same way. The kids who are born to be more adaptable, more go with the flow, the sort of whatever kids, right? Like we're not going to the playground today. No problem. I'm happy to play trucks, where another kid is having like a knockdown, drag out meltdown. So I would say to parents, you want to really tune into who your unique child is and what she needs in order to be adaptable. So you've got the kid who's freaking out going to a new preschool. The answer isn't to just say, fine, forget it. She can't handle this. I'm going to homeschool her. The answer might be, oh, she's telling me that this experience right now is overwhelming for her, and she needs some time and support in order to make this adaptation. And when you approach it that way, the child does eventually adapt, and then they have this incredible sense of mastery. And they have built some resilience and grit, right? That you can't open any periodical or anything about human, functioning and not see the importance, right, of resilience and grit. That's where it's built. It's just that for some kids, the path to it is a little different. And the key for the parent is tuning into what your child needs.
So tuning into what your child needs is something a parent should be focused on when it comes to determining, how adaptable the child is going to be. What are some mistakes that parents make that maybe make the child less adaptable?
So that's a great question, because in my work with families, when we're like unpacking like these tricky scenarios, right? When a child is being inflexible or, not adapting to a new situation, a lot of times what the child needs is actually counterintuitive, and what parents are doing in a knee-jerk loving way is not what the child needs. So let me give you an example. You've got a child, right? Fearful and cautious. You're going with your friends and you're like, everybody's going to learn to ski or snowboard, and everybody's super excited about it. And your friends' kids are like totally eager for it. They're not hampered by self-consciousness and am I going to be good at this? And it's just fun, and they go for it, right? Your child is fearful, anxious, and clinging, maybe hesitating, saying they don't want to go to ski school. The typical reaction is jumping in to cheerlead and to convince your child just how great they're going to be at this, and that they should be like the other kids and they'll be fine, right? Because we get anxious when our kids are behaving in ways that we know are not going to be helpful to them, right? Like we know that if they hesitate and if they are uncomfortable and therefore avoidant, they're going to miss out on a lot of really great experiences. So that's the narrative in our head. So we jump into action and want to immediately make it all better, right? Bribe, I'll give you a candy bar if you stay at ski school, I'll learn how to ski. We'll be so proud of you. Aren't you going to feel badly if everybody else is doing it and you're not doing it? Well, actually, those strategies almost always not only don't help, but they can hurt, because the child who's anxious about this is already feeling a little shame and discomfort, right? That they're not going with the flow. They see the other kids jumping in. They pick up from their parents that their parents are uncomfortable and disappointed in their behavior. And so it's just pile on. They're already anxious about the new experience, and now they feel even more, right, stressed about it. And stress causes kids to shut down. It doesn't open them up to new experience. So that's just one example of sort of how you need to change your mindset and say to yourself, okay, my child is showing me with her behavior that she's uncomfortable right now. This feels scary. It's the unknown. What does she need from me to support her in feeling comfortable taking this next step? So rather than causing more stress with the pressure or your discomfort, it might look like, yes, you're right. This is a new experience, and sometimes new things can be scary. Totally makes sense. Let's break it down. Let's figure out, what would you feel comfortable doing first? Do you just want to be a watcher? If you just want to be a watcher, no problem. The more you force, almost always with these kids who are more hesitant, right? The ones that parents worry are not going to be like the big achievers. The more stress they feel, the less likely they are going to be to actually muscle through it. So you want to give them the space and let them be the decider within some limits. So you might say, we are going to do ski school. I totally get that it feels uncomfortable, and that makes sense. It's a new place and you need time, no problem. I have total confidence that you'll figure it out. You want to really exude that they've got it and that you're fine with whatever process they need to go to.
So once they're off and running in whatever that activity is, how do you help them become really effective at expecting and navigating failure? Because one of the things that's been so consistent, it's regardless of how many gold medals the Olympian who I talk to has, or how many coach of the year titles a coach I talk to has, everybody seems to talk about the role that failure plays in their journey to some degree of success. So it feels like failure should be something that we're excited about our kids experiencing from time to time. How do you get them comfortable with experiencing failure?
Well, it starts with you being comfortable with it. So a lot of the families I work with, actually, that's not their starting point. Like they've absorbed, right, in the zeitgeist that, again, that's another thing, right, that's living out there in our world now, which, like, failure is a part of learning. Failure is awesome. Failure is how we grow. And that's great philosophically, and it is true. But for a lot of parents, if we're honest, in the heat of the moment, we find ourselves doing things that actually communicate the opposite. So that's the first thing to get clear on, right? So, like, even the cheerleading is a biggie. The cheerleading is one of these things that we, of course, are doing because we love our kids and we want them to feel good about what they're doing. But in a way, we're giving them the message that we're not comfortable if they don't succeed at it, right? So we're saying, oh, come on, you could do it. You can get out there. You can kick the soccer ball. You can be with your friends. You're awesome at soccer. So they're actually not giving them the space to feel like they don't have to be perfect at it. And they can take the time to figure that out. So I think that's the starting point, is getting clear for yourself about how you're going to approach this with your child and the messages you're going to send, right? So the message instead might be, soccer is a new thing. It takes a lot of time to figure things out. It feels really uncomfortable to you when you're not in total control. Totally get that. Like, if you don't get the goal, if you don't get the ball a lot, that feels uncomfortable. Totally makes sense. What might make you feel comfortable persisting, right? And you do all that important work, right? Helping kids understand that, muscling through is what we value, is, it takes a lot of effort and the failure is part of learning. But you have to make sure that as you're actually responding to your child in these moments, that you're reflecting that in your messages to your kids.
How do you know, like, the difference between something that's too challenging and something that's just challenging enough that they're going to grow?
So this is a concept actually in the field that we call of course, I'm spacing out on exactly what we call it right now, but it's essentially the zone of proximal development. It's very highfalutin, but in our field, this is actually a big thing when we're working with children, especially like in preschools, is you want to be very clear on where they're at right now, like what skills they have in this moment, what skills with some support and practice they can gain, and what is too high a bar, right? Because if the bar is too high and it's not within the realm of possibility, even with effort, then you're setting kids up for a lot of frustration and a lot of giving up, right? Because it's just not an attainable goal. So I guess what I would say to parents is you really want to tune into, where is my child at right now, right? So like going back to the soccer idea, if they're just comfortable dribbling a ball, but they are not nearly able to plan like who they're going to be passing this ball to, then you know that that's your next goal, right? Is just playing aiming games, right? The goal isn't necessarily to get assists or to get the goal, right? So you want to sort of figure out where they're at, what the next step is, and supporting them in achieving that next step. So for example, I just did a home visit recently with a little, like 3-year-old who was trying to learn to use a scooter. So the goal, like, this is part of the problem. And I think it answers, I hope, some of the questions you asked. If you just expect your child, like your neighbor's very agile 3-year-old is just like racing down the street, totally balancing himself on a scooter, that is going to make your child feel shame that they're not as good as their neighbors. So you want to say, okay, the first thing we're doing is just going to feel comfortable. You're just going to stand on it and I'm going to hold it so you can get a feel for it. Then I'm going to walk by your side while you take one foot off and you use that foot to push you, but I'm going to be holding you, right? Then I'm going to let go and you'll just push yourself, right? So you sort of take these incremental steps to build your child's confidence in order to be able to ultimately master the goal. But you have to be really tuned into what is too high a bar, because that's really the risky place you're in then, if that's what you're aiming for, because your child picks up that you're disappointed in their performance. And that's where you get a lot of those worry about failure and being perfectionistic, because they've gotten the message that they are valued more when they perform.
One of the things that I consistently hear from guests on the show is the difference between focusing on outputs and inputs. And, an author might say, you don't set out to write a best-selling book. You set out to write 20 pages a day, or you set out to write 15 minutes a day. How do you apply that type of principle of focusing on the inputs versus the outputs with children?
Well, that's where you need to be really mindful about not focusing on the product, right? So your child is drawing and you are, instead of focusing on, wow, that's beautiful, you created an amazing tree and an amazing garden in your picture, you're saying things like, oh, you're thinking really carefully about the colors. Oh, you're trying to figure out what shape your flower is going to be. Oh, you're wondering like how tall the grass should be in relation to the house. Like you're basically commenting on their thought process, and their thought process is what is most important, right? So, oh, this is a really challenging puzzle. You're working really hard to figure out, like, how might you figure out where the spaces go? Oh, like maybe you're turning the piece to see if when you look at it from a different perspective, maybe it's going to fit somewhere. You're really trying to figure out like how to solve this problem. So you're focusing much more on that, not on, oh my God, you're unbelievable, you finished this puzzle. You're focusing more on, wow, you're working really hard on that. Wow, this is hard and you're not giving up. You're taking that piece and you're trying to see if it fits in another space. You have really good ideas about how to try and figure this out. So that's what you want to stay mindful of, it's the process, and helping kids feel really good about the process as opposed to the product.
So do you set goals for kids, like milestones, or does that create more stress and anxiety for both the child and the parent?
I think there's some big potential risks there. Like, again, this is one of the hardest things about parenting, right? Is like, you got to be honest with yourself. Like, most of us come into this world like having a picture, or come into parenting having a picture of like a child we want, like if we're honest with ourselves, right? And it's when you're honest with yourself that you're able to then put those expectations aside to actually see who your child really is, right? So if you're a really athletic person and you really value that, like, you want to be aware of that. That, I know I want a kid who's going to get out on the tennis court with me and who's going to run. You see these lovely families with these like 5 and 6 year olds like jogging next to them for like 1 or 2 miles. And you're thinking, oh, that's what I want. Well, what happens if it turns out that your child really prefers more artistic endeavors and is in his head and just wants to create things with Lego or read lots of books? Like, you want to really be careful about separating your wants and needs from your kids' wants and needs. And so any goal setting, I would say, should be driven by the child. Like, you want to follow, that's what makes kids happy, right? Is that their needs and desires, and uniqueness is what's valued, because otherwise what's happening is they're constantly getting messages that somehow we're disappointing them, right? So, like, if let's say you have a slow to warm up kid and he's anxious about going to do the new activity, right? To play t-ball. And these are anxiety producing experiences for parents, because they go and they want their kid to be the one who's like in there in the scrum and having fun and playing and trying really hard. And now you've got a kid who's super hesitant. The goal, for I would say, is just to bring him and have him stay and watch, right? And because it's the expectation that causes the disappointment. If your expectation is, here, my child's going to go out there and be thrilled about trying to hit this t-ball, and he's actually here, this is the space that is full of frustration for both parent and child. You want to say, my child's starting point is he's anxious about this new experience, so our only goal is for him to start to feel comfortable. And if he just plays on the sidelines and has to watch for 2 or 3 sessions before he feels comfortable going in, that's great. So you have to make sure the goal is consistent with your child's ability, and that the goal isn't a performance goal. The goal is to help your child takes positive steps forward to make that an edifying experience for him, however that looks.
Let's pivot a little bit, Claire, to teamwork and collaboration. I want to get into teamwork and collaboration. It's such important topics in anything that anybody does today, whether it's in sport, business, community. We need people who are effective collaborators and effective teammates, and people that people want to work with and collaborate with. So talk to me about teamwork and collaboration. What should we be looking for in our children? What can we be doing to help our children be effective collaborators and team players, both now and in the future?
Well, I mean, I think it starts at home with just the sort of values and experiences and expectations you have for your child within the home. So when I say expectation, I don't mean an expectation like we've been talking about, like you're going to go out there and be like the life of the party, or be the first one on the soccer field making goals. I'm talking about expectations like, in our family, we all have a role to help each other. And so here's what we're going to, on a daily basis, these are the things we're going to be doing to work as a team, right? So that's where, there's tons of research about chores and the importance of chores, the importance of kids feeling like they're making a contribution. I just talked to a family earlier today where they gave me a great idea. And that's one of the things I love about my work, is I learn from my families and then I share with the world and the other families I work with. And what they did was, every day, each kid had to choose one thing they were going to do for each person in the family, and everybody did it. So everybody got something, and it wasn't material. It was like, I'm going to help Joey clean up his toys, right? Or I'm going to let so-and-so pick our show today for TV. Like, it builds in a desire to support other people. And of course, there's tons of research that shows that it's actually the giving that makes people happy as opposed to necessarily the getting. So I think it starts at home with the beliefs and values and ways you operationalize that kids see themselves as part of a team. Um, Obviously, in preschools, there's a big role for that as well, right? That I prefer programs. I'm not going to mention any names, but there are certain, there's different philosophies in preschools, and some of them are much more collaborative and team based, and some of them are much more individual based. So I would say that the programs where your child's going to have an opportunity to work collaboratively and do a lot of free play, where like when those kids, those 3, 4, 5-year-olds are outside trying to figure out like who's Batman, who's Superman, who's the enemy we're going after, how are we going to do that? What are we going to use this structure for? Is this going to be our home base? Is this going to be our cave? Like as they're figuring all of that out during pretend play is one of the richest experiences that you can provide kids to actually eventually be able to collaborate and work as a team, right? Because you're negotiating, you have to listen to other people, you can't always get your way. Those are all things that are criteria for working effectively on a team. So the last thing I'll say about that is some kids are going to come by this more naturally than others. Like you hear that as a theme from me, because in my world, the parents who come to see me with challenges often have kids who are the bigger reactors and have a harder time when things don't go their way. So I just want to be clear that those kids can get there, but the route might be a little different. They may need a little more support to help them feel comfortable when they are Spider-Man and not Batman. Like that may be a harder lift for them. And you just want to be aware of that so that you can help them over time learn to be more flexible so they can be a more effective part of a team.
Let's talk about leadership. Teamwork's a piece of it. I think, you lead by example when you're a good teammate. Now, there are some people that you look at, adults, you say that person's a natural leader, that person has charisma, that person is a great orator, that person is somebody that people like to follow. One of the interesting things that I've discovered about leadership is that leaders come in all different shapes, sizes, and styles. And an example of that is a conversation I had with Olympian Christy Pierce-Rampone. She played for the women's soccer team and achieved a lot of success. She was named team captain when the coach of the U.S. women's national team came to her and asked her if she wanted to be captain. She was shocked. She never thought of herself as a captain. She didn't think of herself as loud and boisterous, somebody who was going to give a rallying speech in the locker room before games. And she was really hesitant until the coach told her that the other players said she should be the captain. And it was an uncomfortable start for her, but she went on to captain the U.S. women's national team more than any woman in American history. And they today call her Captain America lovingly. And what she told me was that she discovered that leaders can be different types. And what was key for her was being her authentic self. So how do we, with our children, and cultivate and grow them to be leaders in whatever it is they do, even if it's simply leading by example, but be true to themselves?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good and important question because, like you say, most of us associate leaders with like the most commanding person in the room who's, the person who's orchestrating everything and, who all the kids are looking to sort of guide them and tell them what to do, right? So that like often that's the picture we have. And a lot of that again is temperament. Like there are certain kids who are just more naturally going to take on that kind of more, traditional leadership role. They might be the firstborn in the family. That's what they're used to. That's what they feel comfortable with. So there's already sort of some pre-existing conditions, if you will, that I think predispose people to be more of that kind of leader. But what that obviates is that there is a whole group of other kids who can and are leaders, but it's in a quieter way, and it's because they know themselves and they feel confident about who they are and what they want, and they don't feel the need to necessarily conform to what the larger group is doing. And those people are often the ones who garner, right, the most respect. So if these are attributes that you want your child to have, then it completely dovetails with everything we've already talked about today, right? It's about tuning in. It's not having some grandiose picture of who your child should be. It's tuning into what makes them tick and nurturing their strengths and valuing their interests and helping them feel seen for whoever they are, so that they are not driven by constant external praise, right? Like that's why we talk a lot about the dangers of praise, right? Because then kids become very dependent on constantly being told how amazing they are, how smart they are, how talented they are, how athletic they are, and they become dependent on it. And they don't develop an internal sense of, I know who I am, I know where I'm going, I feel really good about that. That's what I need. And that's something parents nurture. And so you want to really be sure that it goes back to the goals you're setting for your kids. They have to be defined by your child and what their goal is. For one child, it's going to be to make this amazing Lego tower, right? And then other kids are going to see him doing that in the classroom, and the kids who are drawn to that are going to join him. And he's going to become a natural leader, as opposed to it being some of the kids I see where they're bossing everybody around and they need to be the one in charge. And so they're seen as a leader, but it's more sort of out of fear and intimidation. And so the beauty of all of this is that, like, you have no control over your child. Like you can't make them do anything, right? Like they control their voices, they control their bodies. You can't make them go out on a soccer field and decide to kick a ball. You can't, make them, decide that they're going to like not have a tantrum when you tell them they can't have another half hour of Paw Patrol, right? What you do control is how you respond to them and the messages you send to them. And a lot of what we've talked about today, the beauty of it is you do have a lot of power, but it's not in controlling your child. It's in how you scaffold your experiences with them, how you respond to them when they are showing that they're anxious or they're having a challenge. It's that is where the rubber meets the road in terms of the character of your child and how they feel about themselves and reflect themselves to the world.
So what's one little simple thing that everybody listening can do today to set their child on a path for maximum success and happiness?
I would say to not try and solve their problems for them. That when they are facing a challenge, because a lot of what you're talking about, of course, is muscling through challenges, right? That's what creates leaders, and Olympians and people who are really happy in the long run, right? Is that they know when they face a challenge that they have the power to resolve that on their own. That's really what grows kids' sense of resilience and grit. And that starts with you managing your own reactions when your child is struggling, and to not run to the rescue, to get comfortable with their discomfort, right? To not go in and say, oh, I know puzzles are so frustrating when your kid's like tossing them all over the room. You don't go and say, here's how they go. Don't worry, sweetie. This is how the puzzle, to sort of take everybody out of their misery, because all that does is communicate to your child, one, I don't think you have the ability to figure this out. And I'm uncomfortable with your discomfort, right? When you're not doing things well, it makes me uncomfortable. And I'm the one who could solve your problems, right? You can see how that would sort of cascade into a whole range of challenges. Instead, you're like, oh, I know. puzzles are so hard. They can be really frustrating. I have some ideas. Do you want to hear? Should we figure out how to solve this problem? So you take an approach of collaboration, right? Of facilitation and right, think about good coaching, right? A good coach, that's what they're doing. They're giving the person the chance to figure out how to resolve the problem they're having in whatever they're doing so that that person ultimately is empowered to resolve whatever the challenges that they're facing. And that starts with parents managing their own emotions.
Claire, I could talk to you all day, but I know you're busy and I want to let you go. This has been so much fun. I have learned a ton from you about parenting, about all the things that we need to do and the things, maybe more importantly, that we need to not do as parents to put our children on a path for happiness and success in everything that they do. Thank you for spending some time with me. I know that we're going to help build a world full of tart pullers, as I like to say, people who lead by example, work hard, and do the unexpected things to power their success and happiness. Thanks for spending some time with me, Claire.
Great. Thanks for having me. It was fun.